Okay, hello folks. Welcome to the live Q&A session on assessing and addressing safeguarding risks, which is being delivered by the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub. My name is Corinne Davey and I'm the Senior Technical Advisor at the Safeguarding Resource and Support Hub. And with me today is Oge. Oge, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello all, my name is Oge Chukwudozie. I work with RSH in Nigeria as National Associate. Nice to meet you.
Great, thanks Oge. We're going to take the next hour to explore assessing and addressing safeguarding risks. We'll kick off in a moment with Oge just walking us through a few slides to get our thinking going around what safeguarding risk assessment involves. And also she'll be talking about a risk register that she has developed at the Nigeria hub, and then we're going to open it up to you folks to ask any questions of myself or Oge that you would like to ask around risk assessment for safeguarding. And before I ask Oge to kick off, just a few points on the housekeeping. You're on mute and you have your videos turned off, so that helps us with quality and connection. If Oge or myself drop off, please don't worry, because Oge and I are primed to pick up where the other person is and carry on if our connections are problematic. We've closed the chat apart from two panelists so that we can be on hand to help you with any technical issues that you have. You will have probably heard that we are recording the webinar to share on the online hub afterwards, but your names will not be visible on that recording. The questions that you might like to ask, please do use the Q&A function on the platform to ask the questions, but you can also put your hand up and what we'll do is try and take a number of you as kind of verbally asking your questions. I'll call out your name and our tech folks will take you off mute, and then you can ask the question to us. So we'll manage that between us. So I think without further ado, we might hand over to Oge now to walk us through the risk assessment process and the risk register that she's developed.
Thank you, Corinne. Please, can we have it as slideshow? So we are talking about safeguarding risk assessments. But before we talk about the assessments, let's look at what safeguarding risk really is. So safeguarding risk involves risk of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. That's part of safeguarding risk. It also includes other harms that may be caused by an organization, its staff or representatives, or even the activities. So for example, the behavior of staff and the representatives of that organization may pose harm. So that might be a safeguarding risk. Even the activities can also cause harm to the people. That's also safeguarding risk in the broader sense of it. So every civil society organization faces a broad range of safeguarding risk, as you can imagine. And it is important, therefore, to note that situations, dynamics, and relationships change over, and therefore the risk also change. So risk assessment is actually a continuing process and not just a one-off tick activity. A safeguarding or SCAH risk assessment is central to every CSO safeguarding, prevention, and response measures. So if you want to have adequate and robust safeguarding prevention and response measures, then risk assessment is central to the process. Now, some of you might be wondering, so who and who should be involved in safeguarding risk assessment? Some people will think that safeguarding is just is related to protection or programs, and therefore that's just the people that should conduct the risk assessment. But safeguarding is actually cross-cutting for the organization. So different staff or different units of the organization need to be represented. For example, staff with safeguarding or PSCAH responsibilities, that is prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. Some organizations call safeguarding just as a PSCAH, focusing primarily on the sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. HR staff are also central to safeguarding risk assessment. We will see further down their role. Security and risk staff are also central. Program staff working on various program areas or sectors are also important in conducting safeguarding risk assessment. And these program staff includes, like depending on the organization, if they're handling various sectors or areas like education, WASH, livelihoods, whatever it is, it's good to have a representation from such sectors in conducting the safeguarding risk assessments. And then of course, managers and directors who have oversight of risk assessment process are also to be involved in safeguarding risk assessment. Now let's talk about categorizing safeguarding risks. There are various components of safeguarding risk. In fact, I remember when we pilot tested the safeguarding risk register, it will have a lot of comments that came in that, oh, we actually didn't know that safeguarding is so broad. There are, like different components underlying risks that can be considered as safeguarding risk. So the categorization, we have the context and external environment. This is actually essential because that shows the situation, like the culture, the way, people do things in that environment, in that context. So something like, for example, is a culture or an area that has high rates of GBV, gender-based violence, will definitely have high SCAH risk because, it's the same underlying issue that cause gender-based violence and sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And that's the power dynamics. So we'll look at the context. You also look at the laws, for example. What laws are available? You also look at culture of silence or speak out. Are people willing and able to speak out fully when there is an issue of gender-based violence or issue of sexual exploitation and abuse? So these contexts, these issues actually increase the risk of sexual exploitation. And with that, you need to be very aware of these issues to be able to mitigate them appropriately. Now, the second category is program. From the program, looking at the program cycle, from design through implementation, evaluation, monitoring, you all have to ensure that community, for example, is involved in the program design. So you'll be looking at it and ensuring that community is involved. Why is it important that community is involved? Because they know the issues and they will be able to help to identify and make sure that your program is not going to cause harm in any other way. And also involving different aspects. Remember that community is not a homogeneous group. There are various components of community: men, women, boys, girls, people with disabilities, different ethnic groups, and all that. So ensuring that that is actually factored in. Even having community complaints response mechanism is also essential in your safeguarding risk assessment. Are there complaints mechanism? So if there is no complaints mechanism, that means the risk is high, and then, and when issues come up, you won't even have a way of knowing that it's there. Then human resources, Yeah, human resources, some people will be wondering, so what's the role of human resources? The human resources actually have a great role in safeguarding risk and in the risk assessment. So what's their role? So when you are conducting a safeguarding risk assessment, you're looking at your HR system, you're looking at the whole process of recruitment. From the adverts, you place your adverts to recruitment and then, issuing of contracts. So are you making sure that your system is robust enough that you will not take on someone who is a potential perpetrator or who has done such in the past? So, for example, making sure that your reference check is up and you're not just doing reference check for the role. Most times reference check with organizations focus on the role. Can this candidate do this ABCD that the job title refers to? But apart from that, you also need to ask some safeguarding questions, to the references. And also in terms of even ensuring that when there is now a report, that there is also adequate adequate policy from HR that will determine how the perpetrator will be supported, or the process in the process in investigation to ensure that whether there has been a breach of contracts, a breach of your contract in one way or policy in one way or the other. So that's the role of HR. When the HR is not strong, then that means that leaves a lot of gap for safeguarding risk and the issue to arise. Then the other aspect, the other category is media and communications. So, you have to check, are you getting informed consent from beneficiaries before you take pictures? Do the pictures, protect their dignity, promote their dignity? Or, you are just taking, pictures anyhow and not promoting dignity of the people that they were serving. Also, even in terms of, for example, media visits, like having journalists and communication persons coming in from different places to record. Sometimes we have that in our field. How well are those people aware of your policies? Are they at risk? So that's what you check. Are they at risk of those people causing harm to the beneficiaries? Now, the other one, governance and leadership, this is actually quite central because governance and leadership is actually essential in safeguarding, and we cannot have a robust safeguarding process with weak governance and leadership. So governance and leadership, the management needs to actually take on this role, something that runs through the whole organization, that there are safeguarding focal points, that even the board asks for updates on safeguarding. So a governance and leadership system that does not have robust processes in place to ensure safeguarding is actually weak, and that actually is a safeguarding risk. And then looking at partners, for some organizations, you sub grants to partners, to CBOs, to other partners, or you work with partners in one way or the other. It's essential that the partners also have strong safeguarding system, because the partners are doing what? Are representing you. So they must make sure that the partners understand safeguarding, and so they are from the agreements, are you signing memorandum of understanding, the agreements really have working with them to ensure. And then it's hard because if anything happens through the partners, then that means indirectly it's also affecting the organization. And then information technology and information, have their database. Do you have, how are data protected? Do you have data protection policy? Do you have like a database that is passworded and protected? Do you have good filing systems and all? Confidentiality, for the whole form of data management. comes around this place. When it's a safeguarding risk, when the system is weak in terms of data management and protection, because what happens, that means people's information can just be seen lying around in the office. And what would that entail? That might actually put risk to someone out there in the community whose information is lying out there. Someone else can pick it up and use it and trace the person for whatever and perpetrate harm. Now let's look at the safeguarding risk assessment process. Safeguarding organizational risk management process. So it doesn't have to be separate. Organizations, we usually do risk management, usually conduct risk management. Safeguarding risk management can be integrated and it will be part of what the organization is doing. The risk environment changes, like we've mentioned earlier. So you need to identify risks that are specific to your organization. So you don't have to copy and paste, oh, okay. Even if you're working in a consortium, you might identify some similar risks, but you have to look more in depth in your organization and identify the risks based on your organization. Completing safeguarding risk assessment for the first time can be a lengthy process. Like the tool we have, it's actually quite a number, because we have these categories that I've mentioned, and then we have some underlining questions underneath. So it can actually be a lengthy process, but you will know that what is worth doing is worth doing well. So just take out time and work on that. So, but after the first assessment, you can now focus on updates and additions. Some risks may overlap with other assessments that you may do. For example, protection or security assessments of your organization, undertakes on the external environment can actually be part of what you. So if you have those information, you just now use it and update your safeguarding risk register. Now let's look at the steps for conducting safeguarding risk assessments. So the first step is to assess how each risk area relates to your organization. So we have that risk tool. I'll urge all of you to later on click on the link and look at the tool. So you have you assess each risk area as it relates to your CSO. Note the risk in a risk register. We have that risk register. So you have the Word document that has all the risk, the categories identified, and then you note the risk in a risk register, and then you categorize the risk. Is it low? Is it medium? Is it high? Then you identify ways to mitigate and manage the risk. So this is now the major one. So you've identified where the challenges might be. Risk. We're not saying that this has happened, but we're just saying this is potential, cause for worry. This is a risk. So you identify, now the second step will now be to identify ways to mitigate or manage the risk that you've identified. Allocate appropriate resources to mitigate and manage the risk. And that's where budgeting comes in, and in proposal, you integrate safeguarding into proposals, into programs that you are doing. Set responsibilities and time frame, document mitigating actions. And then step 3 is to monitor the risk, and your mitigating plans. So you constantly monitor. This depends actually on the organization. You might want to do it maybe 3 months, might be too frequent, but depending on the context, if probably there is an issue now that has happened, like we know the insecurity situation in Nigeria now, for example, kidnap, abduction of school children. So in such a situation, a risk assessment might even be on a daily or weekly basis. In some instances, like development programs that have longer time frame, that might be a year, but it's important that you have a time frame that that yes, after this, you're going back to really monitor and ensure that the actions that we are set out has been done and accounts given. So you adapt programs and organizational procedures where necessary. And then the fourth stage is to revisit all the risk categories, again, including areas that you first deemed not to be a risk. So this, again, depending on how you want it, you know, so might be 3 months, might be a year, depending, and then update the risk register. So it's a continuing cycle, you know, you do it and you do it again. It's not like one of the, oh, we've done risk assessments, so there's no need again of going into risk assessments. All right, so at this point, we've gone through that, and then we'll be waiting to hear from you about questions.
Thanks, Oge. As I said before, Oge presented, please write any questions that you have in the Q&A using the Q&A function on the platform, or if you would like to ask us verbally, put your hand up, and we'll try and get through. We'll get to as many of you as possible. We've got a couple of questions. So, Oge, I might ask you the first question that's come through on the Q&A. So you talked in your presentation about resourcing the safeguarding risk assessment. So the question is, what examples of kind of specific line items might we put into a budget for safeguarding?
All right, so some of the resources we can put, first you need to include, even for your staff, you know, what staff, you need to include cost for complaints mechanism. You need to include cost for, then, you know, cost for the actions that you've identified from your risk assessment to be able to ensure that you're able to mitigate those actions. Trainings also is quite essential in budgeting for safeguarding. You need to have adequate funds to be able to train both your staff, community members on safeguarding so that they understand, and that takes quite some resources. You also might want to put out some money out for cases, you know, so let's say for response. So when an issue is reported, you want to be able to have some funds that you can use for the whole process of response, be it attending to the survivor, because response should be survivor-centered, and then ensuring that you also follow through the other processes. So these are some of the budget lines you can put for safeguarding.
Great, thanks, Oge. We have another question that's come through on the Q&A. Do you want me to pick this one up, Oge? The question is, how much do we think internal organisational culture affects safeguarding risk? So, I mean, I could kick this off, and then if you wanted to add anything, Oge, please do. So I think in my experience, I think the internal organisational culture has quite a big impact on safeguarding risk. So actually you could look at this from a couple of angles. You could think about the risk that your organisation has because you have a culture that does not encourage speak up. You have a culture that allows kind of, you know, like bullying or harassment to take place. There's that aspect of organisational culture. I think as on the other hand, if you have a culture where it's all about just delivering, yeah, you know, you're not reflecting, you're not assessing risk. If you have an organisational culture that doesn't enable that time that Oge spoke about to be taken to do that risk assessment, then you're not going to do that well. And I've seen that quite a lot. It's particularly around emergency response, where we think we've got to deliver, and we have very quickly, and we're not taking that time to do that risk assessment. And that, you know, the organisational culture that just drives action and not assessment or reflection or engagement of communities to understand that well enough, you won't have a good safeguarding risk assessment. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Oge, or we also have another question that I can pick up.
No, I think you've handled that well. You can also, there is this other question again here, Corinne, that's talking about, you know, involvement of executive director, talking about culture and leadership. So if the leader is not supportive of safeguarding, what should be done in that case?
Yeah, I think that you know, this is a tricky one. We tend to take try to take an approach with organisations and kind of staff and leadership. It is a bit kind of like the carrot and stick, if you like. The carrot is to try and demonstrate to leadership the benefit of doing that safeguarding risk assessment, you know, and there's lots of benefits, you know, primarily, of course, that you're not harming people in the work that you're delivering. But I think that if you do what Oge described as a process, it means you've got better quality programming, you've got better quality human resourcing, you have better candidates that join your organisation. So that's the carrot bit. I suppose the stick approach, if you like, is to demonstrate to leadership that actually, if you don't do that risk assessment and something goes wrong, you jeopardise the reputation of your organisation and you jeopardise the funding. And that is the reality that is increasing or has increased over the last several years. So that, you know, to present to your executive director that actually the loss to the organisation of not doing this properly is more costly, shall we say, than doing a proper risk assessment.
Yes, if I may add to that as well, I know from interaction with some CSOs in Nigeria, talking from Nigerian perspective, organizations, the executive directors actually fear, you know, there is that fear of not being so transparent and open when it comes to safeguarding, because they, you know, they feel that if they are so transparent, and that means they might lose funding. The donors will come hard, or funders might come hard on them. But Corinne, just like you mentioned, it's actually more costly when you don't put the necessary procedures in place. When you have, then it's transparent and we're able to say, look, this is what I have. So even when eventually someone breaches your safeguarding policy, you know, you will be clear to say, okay, this is what happened, we identified this, and this is what we did. And, you know, it will be clear. And even the donors will realize that, yes, the person actually acted on their own and not, you know, your organization. So your organization is independent of that action and not involved in any way. So let's not have that fear. So most times the executive directors really is about the fear. No, I don't want to go into safeguarding because that means, you know, it will open up a can of worms. It's better that, you know, it's open and then you have the processes and you'll be able to say, no, look, I've done this, I've done that. And, you know, it's that way, even the donors we actually, and the funders, we actually even appreciate what you've done. And that is a good one, rather than saying, no, let's cover it up and not expose anything.
Yeah, that's a good point, Oge. And there's another question that's come through that, Oge, perhaps you could pick this one up. that apart from integrating safeguarding measures in the organisational level, can you also integrate safeguarding measures into individual programmes? So perhaps you could just speak to that.
Yes, exactly. Safeguarding, like we say, is everybody's business. And what does that mean? So it's not, the organization is central because the organization is what is controlling the programs. So organizational systems, so having this safeguarding is part of having a strong organizational system. The organizational system is there to be able to hold on the programs and the program staff should implement or work in line with what the organization has set in place. So I know sometimes there are some programs that are big and they, like they take a life of their own. But even in that instance, it's important that the program staff actually work in accordance with what the organization stipulates. In some instances, let me give an example. We have organizations that, like their head office is somewhere else, and then they are implementing in the northeast region of Nigeria where the humanitarian crisis is. And then with that, so the staff in the northeast are like alienated with what is happening in the head office and might not even know. But the program should really also have safeguarding risk involved, integrated, because like we mentioned, it's part of a category there that you need to assess your program activities, you need to assess staff, you need to ensure that there are complaints mechanisms available at the community level. You need to ensure that community members are sensitized. So all these are parts of the program and they should actually safeguarding, in fact, safeguarding is integral for organization, for program, for everything. Yeah, it's important to really think about it that way.
Right. So there's there's a couple of more questions that are coming through. I picked one up and maybe I'll kick this one off and then Oge, you could add to that. So I think there's two questions here that are similar to one another, and one is that like safeguarding is a new process, particularly for Nigerian CSOs in this particular example, but it's a new process for many CSOs and there's not a budget for it. So how can we add it to the new proposal writing? And then there's a similar question that's actually very much about the risk mitigation, that it's, how do you include it as part of your proposal writing since it's not part of the budget line. So I think, I mean, Oge had touched on this already in terms of what you can include in kind of proposals and budgets. I think the tricky thing is if you don't have the money to do the risk assessment, it's actually then, it's hard to just go ahead and do that. I appreciate that. But I think that there's room when you design a proposal to say that some of the initial activities, would be doing that risk assessment and engaging with communities to, understand how they see that programme moving forward. I've also said, to organisations as well, that you don't need to use it in a budget or a proposal as this is a safeguarding cost. If you're talking about training, there'll be a number of different trainings that you might put in the proposal, and training on safeguarding would be one of those. Oge also mentioned that some of the risk mitigation measures, like it could be, for example, that a risk for a WASH project is that the proposed set of latrines are in a remote place that are not going to be suitable for girls and women to safely use them. So actually the mitigation measure is that you have to locate the latrines somewhere else that are safer. You have to include, you know, lighting, etc. That all has to be part of the proposal. But you wouldn't say that these are measures that you're taking for safeguarding. These are measures that make the programme safer. Yeah, so you don't have to have a safeguarding line per se in the budget. You just have to be thinking through what sorts of training are you doing? How do you design your programme to be safe? You know, what are you therefore costing for making that programme safe, by making the latrines in the right place, by providing the right sorts of lighting, and so on and so forth. So I suppose what I'm essentially saying is try and be a bit creative around how you're incorporating some of this into your proposals and your budgets, you know, particularly if the donors that you have are not, you know, they don't understand safeguarding per se. Be a bit creative about it. Okay, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you've captured that well, Corinne. Thanks.
Great.
There is also this other question, I can make a go at it. If a complaint is made to someone external in your organization and you get to hear about it, you know, how do you deal with this? So I guess, especially if the complaint is from someone not inside the organization. So complaints can be for staff, you know, against staff of your staff, volunteers, and other representatives of your organization. It can also be for other organizations that is not part of your organization. So, but whatever it is, whether it's for your organization or it's external to your organization, I think it's important that as an organization, if you receive such, that you try to handle that. And some ways, some platforms that you can use to bring that up might be through the PSEA network. In Nigeria, we have the PSEA network, even though it started off as primarily in the Northeast, but it's getting more national now. And some other countries too. I know that the PCA network actually exists for humanitarian responses. And there are also maybe consortia and other networks that are available. So you can use such, or the GBV cluster, you can use such to bring up the issue that you received about another organization, because you know all the people that are involved in that are professionals, and you know handle it, that can handle the issue confidentially. If the name of the organization is mentioned, then you might need to take it up with the executive, or you know the top management of that organization. At least by doing that, you've done your own bits of it. But if it's none about your organization, then you'll now apply your internal safeguarding processes and protocols on how to respond to such an issue. Corinne, do you want to also come in there?
No, I think that was a good response. Thanks, Oge. There's another question that I think like Oge and I will probably be thinking, oh my goodness, this is like what they call a $60 million question. It's how does social norms and culture impact capacity to uphold safeguarding policies and systems, and how can this be addressed during the risk assessment stage? Yeah, I think this is a really good question. And I think you'd be looking at this, I suppose, from a couple of angles in the risk assessment stage. So you'll remember when Oge described the categorization of risks, that she talked about that external environment piece. You know, what's happening in society where you're working, in the communities where you're working, that impacts on how you deliver activities safely with those communities, but also impacts, of course, on the staff or the volunteers that you're engaging who come from those societies and those communities. And in all of our countries, that will play out sometimes the same and sometimes slightly differently. So I think the external environment category allows you in the risk assessment to identify, you know, the patterns of gender-based violence or harm, or kinds of practices which are acceptable within that society or community that might present risks. So for example, if you are working in quite a conservative society, or, you know, quite a patriarchal society where girls don't have much of a voice, and actually the programme that you want to deliver is empowering girls to speak out, that should be part of your risk assessment, because you need to anticipate that if you are empowering girls to speak out in families and societies where that isn't a acceptable or, you know, normal practice, there may be a backlash on those girls that speak out. It doesn't mean that, okay, well, you just won't do that programme. What it means is that you have to, in parallel with encouraging girls to speak out in whichever shape or form you're doing that, you have to be engaging with families and communities on what the purpose of that programme is, why you're doing it, have regular discussions about, you know, about potential backlashes or how families and communities feel about it, so that you can kind of smooth the pathway for that programme that you are delivering. I think then the other side, if you look at it inside the organisation, that you know, it will be changing, if you like, kind of staff attitudes or behaviours. You can identify that within your kind of human resources or training area to think about, well, actually, it might take, you know, it might be a lengthy process. You know, we can train people on the code of conduct. If we're changing attitudes or we're changing power, you know, as part of the organisational initiative on safeguarding, the risk is that it's going to take a while, and we should expect that to be a process that needs to carry on for some time, and it's not like a one-off training activity. Okay, anything you wanted to add to that?
Not at all. I think you actually did a great job of explaining that fully. There is another question. Yeah, saying, can we as an organization negotiate with our INGO partners for allocation of resources for PSCAH activities? And the resounding answer is yes.
Yes.
I think, yes, CSO organizations, you should be negotiating with INGO partners. And in fact, most, that will actually show first, that will show the capacity you have. And I'm sure, you know, the organization, the INGO partner will have more confidence in you. And again, now, safeguarding PSCAH are now top on the agenda for many donors. Donors are quite interested in that. And most, like for example, RSH is an FCDO funded program, you know, really just to support CSOs to be able to strengthen their safeguarding systems and structures. Discuss with your INGO partners, with other funders you may have, you know, currently, to really strengthen. Some organizations are stronger than the others. I know some organizations that before they take on a partner, they will do due diligence, which will include, you know, safeguarding activities or PSCAH activities, to ensure really how strong the partner is. So yes, it's important that we ensure that PSCAH activities is part of our programming, and even, you know, include it in our budget. So please negotiate, continue to advocate and push for this.
Great, thanks, Oge. Just a reminder to folks, keep the questions coming. If you want to raise your hand and verbally ask us a question, please do so. We've got probably about another 10 minutes before we'll close this out. With just a question that's just come in. What if we find out the risks are significant in a particular area of the organisation and we cannot mitigate them properly, you know, despite thinking through various solutions? Okay, what do you think on that?
Okay, when you see that you cannot mitigate fully, I think, like we've discussed, you can take it a step at a time, allocate the resources that you can on a particular area and, you know, continue to work your way through. It's also important to be as transparent as possible with your funders, you know, letting them know that these are the gaps, these are, you know, the resources that you have already, and then probably more support can be provided to you from the donor. It might be technical, it might be also financial. And also to help you, I want to also at this point to remind us that for RSH, we have loads of resources in our online hub that you can go to get information, resources, tools that will help you to walk through your safeguarding journey. Corinne, please also come in.
I thought that was good, and I think it may well be, I think particularly with a program or project, that you might have to decide that that project as it's designed can't go ahead because you can't mitigate the risks properly and they are too significant. But that, you know, that again is an organisational decision that you'll need to take, weighing everything up and you know, doing as Oge has described, you know, seeing what you can do to mitigate it, and then deciding whether it would be better not to go ahead if you really can't make it as safe as you can. So we've got a couple of hands raised. Yes. I think Kumba had his hand, he or she had his or her hand raised, and then Afolabi. So should we go to Kumba first? So Kumba, you're going to be taken off mute, and would you like to ask your question? Kumba?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's outside the presentation, but I just wanted to know that does each and every organization need like a full-time person for safeguarding, or it can be done by consultants only?
Thank you for that. That's another kind of how long is a piece of string answer as well. But I think you know, most organisations, well, the larger organisations have a combination of, you know, full-time safeguarding people and those who work it as a kind of part-time role. The small organisations that I've worked with have not tended to have a full-time safeguarding role because they haven't been able to afford to have that. But they've had it as part of somebody else's role. I think that works, but it works only if everybody in the organisation plays their part on safeguarding. So that would be, you know, really important that people realise they've got their own role to play in contributing to that safeguarding environment and making that work well. Oge, anything from you on that?
Yes. Yeah, I want to share a personal experience. So for me, I was working with this INGO, the big INGO, known worldwide. And when I started my safeguarding journey, it wasn't full-time. In fact, I didn't even know what it was. I was on protection. I was doing protection programming. And my line manager was like, okay, there's this other additional responsibility that I would want you to have. And I'm like, what is that? He said, oh, well, it's about providing support to the organization and also other organizations to ensure that their protections. Then there was like that distinction, is it protection policy, safeguarding policy, you know, so like to make sure that the protection policy is abided, understood. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, so I took it on, and then I was now reading. So then I was still handling my posts as the protection advisor, and then taking on this. And then, you know, I had to like wade through, read lots of resources and all, you know, to understand what that meant. And eventually, as the office was growing, because we identified with that, we identified loads of gap, you know, when I took on that. I said, like, for example, we are supposed to be training new staff. When I joined this organization, nobody trained me on safeguarding or, you know, those policy. I don't know. You're supposed to be training that. You're supposed to be doing this, that, you know, have focal points in different states. That's what your policy says. So how come these are not happening? You know, so by the time, you know, all those, you know, activities now started happening, it now required, like, there is need for more dedicated person. And then I moved from, in fact, again, my project ended, you know, let me just see, my project ended, and then I was now made the full-time, you know, safeguarding person. So you can imagine this is an INGO, and, you know, I didn't start, you know, from my experience, I didn't start as a full-time, but as the scope, you know, increases, you will now see the need for more. So I would say for organizations, for smaller organizations, you can start with having a focal person. That person might be someone who already has another job, probably someone already in protection, if you're doing protection programming. But again, you know, the interest, the passion will have to be there, you know, for the person to seek out and learn more and say, what do I need to do in this? What do I need to do? And then, of course, the support of management is essential, so that as a person, you know, the person is working with management to come up with, you know, things and that's supposed to be done. The policy will have developed and other things, you know, and then of course implemented. So, and then as maybe you are getting more funds, you can now put on for the role of a full-time.
Right, thanks, Oge. Let's hear from Afolabi. Apologies if I don't pronounce your names correctly, but Afolabi, you're being taken off mute now. Do you want to ask your question? Afolabi? If you don't speak now, I shall move on.
Okay, Corinne, is there another person that has?
Yes, so Adamu, we're taking you off mute. Would you like to ask your question?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And once again, I would like to appreciate the RSH for the training I will be receiving on safeguarding so far. And the resources are very helpful. My question is that we does this particular project that we're implementing, and it's an education project. We're working with girls in community, and then part of the project we have to mainstream PSCA into it, where we create establish reporting mechanism, create awareness on PSCAH. And lately, I went to the communities where we're implementing those activity, and we interface with the community stakeholders and some women group. And one of the concerns that they are raising is the men in those communities are saying that the language that is being used, you know, for the awareness on safeguarding, some language are unacceptable in the, you know, in the community. They felt this is not right. We're using some kind of language that we're exposing their girls to. Though the girls are learning and they are becoming to be very aware on these issues around PSCAH. And I was concerned, and because, you know, PSCAH is just coming on board now. And thanks to RSH, this is the first platform that has rendered to give us capacity development on aspect of PSCAH. So I don't know whether if they can still go extra, maybe to look at some of the materials on PSCAH and then have contextualize it, especially in the Northeast Nigeria where the humanitarian crisis is on, and maybe have a more unified language, especially in Hausa, where the people mostly speak Hausa, so that they feel the message is acceptable in the community. So, you know, we as civil society, we don't have access to resources, not to talk about enough financial resource to be able to engage people that would translate the materials from English to the contextual language where we feel is acceptable. So I don't know whether if RSH will support in that, and possibly share some materials that you know, can be used here in the Northeast by the civil society engaging. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So, Oge, I'll let you answer that, and then I'm going to answer one final question that's in the Q&A, and then we'll close out. So, Oge, do you want to pick that one up?
Yes, and thanks, Adamu. I'm actually happy to hear that you found the resources from RSH useful, and RSH is one of the organizations or platforms that you've benefited in terms of training and capacity building. Yeah, so talking about translating materials, that's actually part of our task. You know, we've already identified that we'll have materials, especially the materials that will be used at community level, to translate them into our local languages. And we've selected, because of the national view of RSH, so we want to translate resources into the 3 major languages in Nigeria of Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba. So that is in the pipeline.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Looking forward to see that. Yeah.
Thanks. And I think that the last question that I'll pick up is, can you talk about assessing risks to the victim, survivor, or the person that reported an allegation? I think this is a really good question, and we didn't, Oge and I, we didn't cover this particularly about that, you know, in the risk assessment piece, in terms of how we presented on it. But yes, risk assessment is really important once you receive an allegation, as part of thinking through what next steps do you take. And that risk assessment in terms of the response, you know, it has to be a continual process. So you'll get the allegation, you will think about, you know, what would the next step response be? What are the risks to the survivor or the person reporting or the subject of complaint? You analyse that and then think, and then decide, okay, this is then the next step that we'll take in that response, and moving towards, you know, the investigation, if that's, you know, what you're going to do. And then that risk assessment has to kind of be referred to, updated and elaborated on, if you like, throughout that process of response. You know, in some contexts, particularly if you're working or trying to investigate or respond remotely, or you're in, you know, particular conflict situations, that risk assessment is absolutely vital to pay attention to even think about whether it's safe to conduct an investigation in the normal way, I should say, or whether you need to do, you know, your organisational investigation or inquiry through different routes, so that you make sure you are keeping those involved as safe as possible. There are a couple of resources on the Resource and Support Hub that can help with thinking through that risk assessment for response to an allegation. Okay, so thank you for today. I think thanks from Oge and myself. I hope Oge doesn't mind me thanking on her behalf. We're going to share a poll with you now, which we'd be very grateful if you could complete, because it'll help us think about how we've done on this particular Q&A, and whether we do something similar in future. apologies to those of you that wanted to ask a question and that we didn't get round to that. We are going to share the recording and the slides. If there are any questions that we didn't answer that came through on the Q&A and chat, we will answer those. Those of you that have put your hand up, if you wanted to write something, your question in the chat quickly now in the last minute or so, then we'll get around to answering that as an outcome from this live Q&A. But otherwise, yes, please complete the polls. And then once the polls are completed, we will say goodbye and thank you very much.